Okay, good evening. Welcome to the latest version of Building the Scottish State with myself, Dr. Mark McNaught, here on the 2nd of June, 2022, and have the great pleasure to have with me Councillor Math Campbell to talk to us about independence, his new experience on serving on the council in the recent and his election in the recent elections, and anything else which comes up, which many things do when we're having a good old chat with Matt. So first of all, thanks for being with us this evening.
Thanks very much, Dr. Mark.
Right, so
Dr. Mark.
So tell us about your recent election. Where were you running? What was the situation? How did the campaigning go? Just tell us about your experience.
It's not my first time in council. I was an SNP Councillor in Inverclyde from 2017, and then I moved to Argyll and Bute and didn't stand for election in 2017. Decided to stand for election this time round, so I was successfully elected to be the SNP Councillor for Helensburgh Lomond South, which is an interesting ward because it's vacillated between Tory, Lib Dem, and the Tories and Lib Dems tend to do fairly well. This time around, we actually managed to win. I won on first preference votes. I didn't get the highest amount of first preference votes. One of the Conservatives still managed to get the highest amount of first preference votes, but I was still elected in the first round. So that's a real progress to show that even in traditionally Tory areas where the Tories come first, the Lib Dems come second, and then SNP is left to sort of flounder around in third or fourth, we're actually making a difference. We're getting to be in the first position. We're winning first preference votes, and that's a really positive thing. I think across Argyll and Bute, we are the largest party. Again, we were already the largest party. We're now larger. So unfortunately, the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives have done a deal with a couple of the independent councillors. Argyll and Bute and Highland in particular in Scotland have a history of people who claim to be independent whilst still being members of political parties. So the Lib Dems and the Tories have done a deal with a couple of these so-called independent councillors, and they've managed to take control of the council, which is very unfortunate because the SNP are the largest group. The SNP won more councillors, the SNP went up, but what can you do? So we're now forming an opposition group, and we're working with actual independent councillors and colleagues in the chamber, like the Greens, to push the administration. It's a very fine line. It's 17 to 19, so it's really on the cutting edge. So at some point we might end up being able to take control, which is what I think the electorate voted for. But until then, we're there to sort of hold them to account and push back on the more ludicrous policies. So but I'm optimistic that we can take control at some point in this term. I'm really glad to be back in elected politics.
Yeah, how could that come about? I mean, so they've presumably formed a coalition, a governing coalition in the council. What types of things can happen that would enable your coalition to take the majority? Obviously, it's very tight. So I mean, just the question, it's a difference of 1 or 2 seats.
Well, one would really make it 18-18. One person change, so we could persuade one of the independents to switch sides. We might be able to persuade the Liberal Democrats to switch sides. I understand that not all of their group were actually happy about going into bed with the Tories because, well, for obvious reasons, they're Tories. So they could switch sides. But even not just saying in Argyll and Bute, because the film gets not hoping that we do on our sadly pass away. So
okay, you're breaking up just a little bit.
I think realistically might be more likely that we'll see a councillor. Is that any better?
A little better, yeah. It caught up, yeah.
Is that any better? Yes. Sorry,
yes.
We were breaking up there. Realistically, anything could happen to change 1 or 2. I think we broke up a little bit there. Are we back on?
You're back now. So tell us a little bit about what are the major issues in your council Well, what are the major issues in your council that you're dealing with, and what do councils do basically? Do they just deal with the local stuff, the roads, the schools, or what are the issues that you have?
When I find out, I'll tell you. I'll let you. So yeah, we councils are responsible for the delivery of a lot of local service provision. And our guy in Uppbeat for health, for education, for
Okay, well, Math has presumably frozen. I'm sure that we're trying to get back with that. Until I get Math back, I just wanted to give our plug for the SSRG Empower the Nation meeting that we'll be holding at the end of July. We're hopefully within the next week we will have the tickets to. Oh, good, excellent.
I don't know what's the internet. I don't know what happened. It was.
Hopefully we'll have Math back soon. So as I was saying, on having on again the 29th, 30th, and 31st. You able to get back, Math? Hopefully. Okay, so it may take a couple of minutes here. So hold on. Okay. Okay, well, we're still trying to get Math back. As I was saying, the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group will be holding its Empowering Scotland conference at the end of July, the 29th, 30th, and 31st. We should have tickets going on sale, hopefully within the next week or so, where you can, where I believe it'll be £25 for all 3 days. We have already have some very interesting speakers. Hopefully Billy Kay will be there. Okay, we're back. Okay, we're back. Okay.
Hi there. I don't know what's happened as to why my why I dipped off there. My internet's fine, but maybe a server somewhere.
Okay, so we were speaking about the issues that you are dealing with at the council level, and
yes. So I mean, we're in administration, so we're in opposition. So I think the way that's going to look, we have to hold them to account on things. But council is responsible for one of local services. They're responsible for education, roads, transportation stuff, sanitation. Gamut of stuff that councils are actually responsible for implementing, even things that are decided that are responsible for. The Scottish government are giving the councils the money to actually do. So I think it's a case that the councils are possibly the most important level of government in Scotland, because they're the part of government that actually delivers most of the services. More so now with health and social care partnerships, meaning a lot of local NHS services are implemented by what is effectively local government. So it's I can see a question in there. Is the proposed filming? I'll just answer that quickly. Unfortunately, no, it is not. It's within Western Berkshire Council. So if you have any comments on that, you will need to speak to Western Berkshire. but it's actually within the Trossachs and Lomond National Park, so it's up to them to decide. So you can speak to them. Unfortunately, I don't sit on the Trossachs and Lomond National Park. I think my views were made pretty clear on Twitter the other day. I am dead against it. But to go back, yes, the issue of local councils in Scotland is that they actually deliver more service, and we also have more commitments coming forward every day, sort of thing. So I think it's very important that we shine more on the Byzantine sort of white council administrations, because people see the parliament, they see how it works, they see parties operating with each other, they see it's big in the news where they see what their local council does, and they don't find out why these decisions get sometimes. I think it's important people actually pay more attention to their local councils. Except in my ward. My ward is fine. It's all good in my ward. I joke.
Okay, and how have the meetings gone so far? Have you, how many council meetings have you held so far since the election?
One. We only have a council every 4 to 6 weeks, so we've had one so far.
Okay.
So yeah, we've only had the one, and that was the one where they said we had the votes and decided who was going to be in charge effectively, which we lost. So.
Okay. All right. Okay. And so how do you see the independence movement at this point? I think that it's fair to say that there's a somewhat of a kind of a trepidation and impatience within the Yes movement of not knowing exactly when there will be a referendum and under what conditions. Just based on what you've heard and how, what are the prospects for, in your view, having a referendum within the next year or so, and actually be getting independence?
Well, I think it is going to happen within 2023-2024 financial year, because that's what the government's paid for it. So it's kind of like the governments operate on a funding basis. So if governments put up the money to pay for something, that's when it's going to happen, because that's when the money's there for it. You don't put up the money if you're not going to do it. I think that we are in preparation for an independence referendum. I think that the government have set out a goal that they're pretty clearly going to hold it now. If nothing else, the fact that they've put the money up and said, right, this is to pay for the referendum, which we've seen in the news because a lot of people were spending money on independence because people are starving in these banks that the Tories have caused, and always would rather we don't spend money on independence. Stop food banks. Not sure how the logic works there, but yeah, so the government paid for it, so effectively, they put it in the spend that happened in 2024. For a second, but I'm going to. So apologies.
You're sort of back.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening here. I just did a network speed test. My internet's running completely fine, fast as normal.
It sounds good now, so may long it last, but it sounds good now. So we'll just.
I think it might be on the other end, so to speak, the server stuff. I don't know why my connection's dropping out. Is yours dropping out as well?
Not that I know of. It's no, I don't think so. Anyway, so
sorry about that. I have no idea why.
No biggie, but you sound good now. So long may it continue. And do you see what do you see as the difficulties? I mean, given the fact that it may not be a Section 30 referendum, that there might be resistance from the British government. They may take it to court. There may be, like in councils that are controlled by opposition parties, they may not facilitate it. Do you have some concerns about the functioning of it? If it does take place in the next year or two?
I think the point one of the persons just making the question there made the half of 1/10 of 1%, so if the 1%. That's right, isn't it? Yeah, 1/20 of 1% of the Scottish budget has been spent on it, so it's a minuscule amount in real terms. I think I think a lot of this, when you talk about legalities and votes and government, I think it's important to remember that governments make laws. So unless it's a fundamental principle that's being breached, the government being told you can't do that, it's against the law, doesn't always track, because government will just change the law then. In the terms of the Scottish government holding a referendum, the Scotland Act is not precisely 100% clear on whether the Parliament has the power to hold a vote, which it does have the power to hold, on a reserved matter. The Constitution is, no doubt about it, the Union is a reserved, it's explicitly reserved in the Scotland Act. But holding a vote isn't reserved. That's a not reserved matter. And the Scotland Act doesn't really specify whether holding a vote, which is allowed, on a reserved matter, which is not, counts as a reserved matter itself. It doesn't say. It's really a matter for the courts. If it came to that, it would be a matter for the courts. I think, therefore, there's an element of politics in this, because, as you know, well, you might know, judges don't like politics. Judges really don't like politics. The courts do not like getting involved in politics, full stop. They hate getting involved in politics. There is not a judge in the land that will go, this is a political matter, I want to be the one to make a ruling. And hate it. They absolutely despise it. So they will do everything they can to avoid it. I comes down from the Scottish government. Someone just said going to be set for 2020. I've no idea, but I suspect that may well be the date. If it's between 2023 and 2024 financial, it's going to be at some point between May and May, or April and April to be precise. And therefore, September is probably one of the more likely dates, but it's not up to me. It's up to Nicola Sturgeon. In terms of a Section 30, obviously the First Minister has said that's the gold standard with Section 30, because the British government confers legality or something. The holding a vote is the Scottish people's right. It's more that the Section 30 order would be the UK government basically saying, we will not challenge this in court. Right. And we won't let anyone else challenge it in court either. Whereas if we hold our own referendum under the terms of the Scotland Act, that may well be legal, but holding that vote is then open to challenge in the same way that any Scottish Parliament Act is open to challenge. But that challenge itself may not just come from the UK government. It could come from anybody really that's got the money to go down to the court of session and say, hey, I challenge this act. So whereas a Section 30 agreement has the backing of Westminster's legislative process, which puts the matter slightly more beyond doubt. It makes it slightly harder to challenge. So I think that's kind of where not having the courts intervene is the preference of the government more than the Section 30 order itself, because that's just Westminster agreeing to that. It's not really up to them anyway. It's not their vote. But I can see where the position of the First Minister is on this, because it stops court challenges. To be quite honest, that's something we'd all be down for. Except the lawyers. The lawyers love court challenges. But yeah, I think realistically, yes, I think we will have an independence vote. But again, I think, like I said, it will come next. And I think if, depending on who the Prime Minister is in 6 months or 6 days, I think that it may well come down to what the Prime Minister, the current occupant of 10 Downing Street, decides. Boris Johnson, it's really hard to say. The man's Teflon. Everything seems to scope off him. But I think there is really a building movement for that guy to be gone. Someone said to me the other day they've got cheese in their fridge with a longer shelf life than Boris Johnson. And I think this time it may well be true. And we thought he was going last year. Again, we thought he was going the year before that too, to be fair. So, I mean, I don't know if he will be gone soon, but I do know that whoever replaces him is more likely to be slightly less, daft about the referendum itself. But I think in real terms, there is going to come a point, there is going to come a point that the British government, someone in, the Whitehall mandarins, takes the Prime Minister or the Secretary of State aside and says, look, we've lost. The polling that they have is more accurate than the polling we have, and they won't release their polling anymore. They used to release their polling and say triumphantly, independence is only the settled will of 20% of the Scottish people. Now they won't release it, and they're putting it under, they refuse to release it under FOI, which suggests that, they don't want to release it. And what that tells me is that at some point there's going to come a point where the mandarins have said, look, we're going to lose. We're going to lose. fighting it and let us on a week or London. It's come down to self-interest. We'll say, what can we and it's how do we put in for the best position? That's fine. There's a question coming in there.
Yes. Well, let's see. Well, so does that mean that the English government is sovereign over Scotland, contrary to the? I mean, shouldn't because you may have. I'm sure you saw that Ian Blackford got up in the Westminster Parliament and said basically that it's the Scottish people that'll decide, not Westminster.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much tapping in with the claim of right and the Scottish.
Absolutely. No, I think, like I said, I mean, I'm not, you know. I'm not a lawyer, but at the same time, I'm pretty certain that the way the Scotland Act is, you know, configured, the fact that the way Section 30 orders aside, the way the Scotland Act is configured, I'm pretty sure it's right that the Parliament will pass a referendum bill, and it will. Now, it can get challenged after that before it receives assent. That's you know, the nature of legislation. But I think it will be more likely that it will get through. And at that point, the UK government are then fighting the Scottish Parliament, the settled will of the Scottish people, and the courts to get a ruling against a referendum. And they know that as soon as they challenge that thing in court, which they have the legal right to do, but as soon as they challenge that thing in court, we're going to see independence go from 50% to 60% overnight. They know that. We know that. There's almost a kind of, yeah, sure, you challenge it in court if you want. This will be fine. We're fine with that. You know, there's almost a game of brinkmanship there. So no, I think the question about sovereignty there. So what you're saying is if we vote, the English government can decide if we are sovereign or not. No, I think it's important to separate out the English government, which is the UK government acting in England, the UK government, which in theory includes Scottish MPs, although we all know it doesn't, and the way in which the devolution settlement is sort of ran. The UK government giving us a Section 30 order is essentially them confirming the Scottish Parliament have the right to hold a referendum and respecting the result of that themselves. They're saying we will respect the result and we are absolutely certain, beyond doubt, absolutely you can hold this vote. Whereas without the Section 30, it's up to lawyers. Literally, it's up to the Lord Advocate and the Court of Sessions to say, yes, the Scottish Parliament can pass a referendum bill and hold it. I think they will say yes. And then it's up to the government or anyone else who wants to challenge that in court. So Section 30 really just stops court challenges before they get started, sort of thing. It's really not anything else about them recognizing a result or something beyond that. It's not about sovereignty in that instance. It's about courts and lawyers. And less money for lawyers is all something we can all get behind.
And what's your view on the franchise for this? And now, as I understand it, I believe I understand that the last referendum was held basically on the local franchise, the local franchise. So anybody who lived and legally lived and worked in Scotland could vote on a very heavy constitutional matter. Myself in France, I still am a UK citizen. And before Brexit, I could vote in the local elections and in the European elections, but I could not vote in any referendums or the presidential or the parliamentary elections. And I understand that because I'm not a French citizen, and so I shouldn't be part of. I don't feel I need to be part of more constitutional issues. I don't see that it's been worked through in Scotland, given that the last. The franchise has been controlled largely by the British government or by the local councils, and there's no real.
Go ahead,
please.
The franchise in Scottish elections. I was going to say the franchise in Scottish elections, including the referendum in 2014, is settled by the Scottish Parliament.
Okay.
So local government elections in Scotland, the Scottish Parliament elections in Scotland, and the referendum are all under the control of the Scottish Parliament, which is why, despite a lot of Tories arguing that people born in Scotland who don't live in Scotland should have a vote, the Scottish government took a very principled stand of, if you are legally resident in Scotland and you are over the ascribed age and you don't fall into, like prison, mentally unable to, mentally incapable, you can vote. And that is a very good blanket line that I don't think we should tamper with too much, because that includes then everyone in Scotland can vote. Everyone that lives and works here that can have a say on their future. If you don't live and work here, you can't.
Okay.
And there's
what about
people
what about people with second homes or army personnel based in Scotland or things?
I mean, we already have procedures for that sort of.
Okay. I wasn't sure. So please explain.
We already have that sort of thing. If you only get to register to vote once in the UK, so if you're an army personnel that's based in Scotland, you can register to vote in Scotland if you live here, yes, but you can't then register to vote elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So if you have to declare your principal post. I do get there is an issue with second homeowners, especially if they're based elsewhere. Someone's saying Indigenous people were barred from voting, Math would be disenfranchised. Yeah, I wasn't born in Scotland, so I couldn't.
And I don't think that the people who are looking at this carefully
absolutely
exclude anybody like yourself who live here, who have made their life.
Well, yes, you see that would be the answer. You can vote as long as you're voting yes. No, I think that would be 100% yes. No, that's the that's not the way we run elections in Scotland. We'll leave that to Boris Johnson. I joke, but the way the franchise works is effectively if you live and work here and you're over the voting age, which we made 16 now, and you're not in prison. Well, only violent prisoners now, and you live and work here, then you get to vote. Now, second homes, I get that there is an issue there of someone declaring that their second home is actually their principal home when it's not. Legally speaking, they're committing electoral fraud by doing that, but proving that it's not their principal home is another matter, particularly if it's their principal home is elsewhere in the UK, because then we can't say, well, no, we've looked at your council tax and you don't pay. It gets tricky, I get that. But at the same time, we're talking about edge cases, which electoral fraud should get picked up. But we're talking about edge cases, we're talking about a very small amount of people that actually takes there, So it's a very important principle, I think, that if you live and work in Scotland, you get a say over Scotland's future, regardless of whether you moved here last month, or regardless whether you moved here as a child, or if you've been born here and your parents were born here and your grandparents and your great grandparents lived there. So it's a case of you live and work here. The future of the country is in your interests, so you get a change to you get a chance to vote on it. I think that's an important principle. And tinkering, I think, with that would be dangerous, because it then brings in edge cases of, well, what about if you just moved out of Scotland for a little bit, and then suddenly you're letting people vote that haven't lived there for 70 years, who have no business voting in elections, because it's none of their business, because they don't live here and they aren't going to live here. So it's a difficult one. And someone's saying no other countries lets immigrants vote on constitutional matters. I don't think that's entirely true, actually. We talk about citizenship, though. I think when we're talking about Scotland, that what sort of Scotland do we want to be as an independent Scotland? Do we want to be a welcoming country, or do we want to have a hostile environment like the UK government have gone, where immigrants get turned away at the door because you've not got the right piece of paper stamped? I think it doesn't say if you live and work here, you get a vote. That seems to be a very plain, simple, and understandable metric that no one can gainsay as an easily understood thing. Do you live here? Yeah. You work here? Yeah. Good. Have a vote. There you go. Grab a tartan on the way out. That's as easy and as difficult as it needs to be. There's no hedging around that. I think the problems with the franchise aren't really, to me, the big issues. It's the demographics that people said. Someone said about English Scots voting. Obviously, I'm the national convener of English Scots for Yes. We just did a panel at the Aberdeen Independence Movement on the border. That was quite a well-received panel, I understand. I would say that. One of the things that someone said was, our English people didn't vote yes, and it's true. Yeah, 60 to 70% of English residents or English-born residents in Scotland, so English Scots, voted no. But there's a demographics section to that as well, because it's not just because they're English; it's because the amount of English people who are retirees is much larger in terms of Scottish, so the amount of people who moved to Scotland from England who are retirees is much larger than the average. So it's really more about the older, richer demographic. Older, rich people tend to vote no because, they're voting for the status quo. The system has worked great for them. They've got a nice house in the country. They live in a nice country. It's got free prescriptions. They don't need another passport. Everything's groovy. Why would I change it? They're voting for the status quo. So it's not about English versus Scottish or anything like that. I think it's more about demographics and, status quo-ness. Someone said there, why did the UK stop European citizens voting for Brexit when they paid taxes here? Because the UK have a hostile environment towards people from the EU. We didn't decide that. We would have let them vote, but we asked for them to be able to vote. So it's
especially because their future was more at stake than anybody else's.
It's madness. The whole thing about Brexit was madness. To be fair, though, we asked for a quadruple lock. We asked for it so that all the nations in these isles would have to agree to Brexit before we would have Brexit. And the UK government went, no, we're not having that.
Mm-hmm.
And we are now in the situation where Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland are getting dragged out of Europe as well. Although Wales narrowly voted for it, it was very narrow there. It's a mess.
From what I understand,
Brexit's a bloody mess.
From what I understand, native Welsh. I don't want to be too nationalistic or whatever, but the Welsh largely voted to remain in the EU, but it was the more of the English population, more British population that helped.
I'm no expert in Welsh politics.
I'm not an expert on statistics, and I'm not pretending to.
Doing siarad Cymraeg, but I'm definitely not an expert in Welsh or Welsh politics. That's about all I can say. That and doing offie coffee. I like coffee. It's one of them shibboleths for learning Welsh. But the situation in Wales is a little different because in parts of the South Welsh Valleys, you've got areas where 40% of the residents were born in England. Yeah. And so it colours the situation slightly more there. But that shouldn't matter because, you live and work in Wales, you're also Welsh. So it's same as in Scotland. We believe in civic nationalism, and so do the Welsh nationalists looking to have independence for Wales. I think that in their situation, they have their situation with Brexit, I think, is coloured in the way that Wales has suffered from immigration policies that didn't actually help because Westminster dumped immigrants into poorer areas of Wales and didn't give them support. So it's not that they didn't, and that's no harshness on the immigrants. The immigrants are the victims there as well. Yeah, so I think that it's allowed the likes. It's the likes of UKIP have used that to rouse up anti-European support in Wales, and that's dreadful because apart from anything else, these immigrants weren't European either. It's nothing to do with the EU, and I think that's maybe why some of the Brexit votes there were so anti-European. But in reality, it was just London decided, hey, South Wales, that's a great place to throw some no support and dump them in a community, and to the credit of the Welsh communities, they welcomed them with open arms, but it has meant that there's always that tiny angry fringe element in any community. Then people were weaponized by UKIP, much the same way in the northern communities and also in parts of Glasgow, although in Glasgow I think it just didn't take harm, the UKIP situation, which is why we've seen what Glasgow treats immigrants like. Glasgow is the heart of Scotland.
That was so beautiful when the vans were there to take away those immigrants. That that hundreds of people came and stopped it, and they did that in Kelvin. They did in Glasgow last year.
And then in Edinburgh a couple of weeks later. Yeah,
one of the most beautiful human things I've ever seen in my life. And
it's showing that Scotland doesn't tolerate this nonsense, and you can bring your border thugs to take people away, but it's not going to work. I think that shows the depth of feeling in Scotland, and I think if that had happened in South Wales, I think that could have been a similar outcome there. But in Wales it's very close. Northern Ireland, they voted to stay. Northern Ireland, I'm not going to comment in Ireland because I'm an English Scot, and I think that Ireland has had enough English people over the centuries commenting on their internal politics. So I won't comment on Ireland. I will leave Ireland to the Irish. It's a very politically safe comment.
Anyway,
I think that I think that the situation with that someone was saying, did a majority of immigrants from further afield in England vote or against? I think it was actually broadly 60-40 for that. It wasn't that much different to the 55-45 split. It was slightly more. But again, you've got to remember there that they were weaponized by the Tories in that respect as well. They were told if you vote for independence, you'll get kicked out of Scotland because Scotland will get kicked out of Europe.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we saw how that worked. So I think that's a telling. I think then people have learned, maybe don't believe the Tories when they're telling you things, because every person I've spoken to who is a European citizen is now who voted no is now absolutely fervently voting yes. In fact, some of the most militant people I know for independence are people who are European citizens. It's they're new Scots from Europe. They're like, no, we got duped in 2014. We're not getting duped again. We want independence now, please. We need to be back in Europe. So it's I've no idea, to be honest. I know the for Independence group are a very passionate group. The Belfast Agreement and the Edinburgh Agreement. The Edinburgh Agreement governed the 20 constitutional side of the independence referendum. That was covering the Section 30.
Yeah, the Edinburgh Agreement is not really relevant to the Brexit. Belfast.
The Belfast Agreement? Do you mean the Good Friday Agreement, perchance?
It's with the protocol and the British government wanting to ditch the protocol or just simply ignore it, even though they signed it. That is a threat to the Belfast Agreement. Edinburgh Agreement, if you're referring to the convention to hold the referendum in 2014, that's pretty irrelevant.
Yeah, so it's not really relevant. When you say the Belfast Agreement, I mean the Good Friday Agreement.
I think so, because it's always been it's also been called the Belfast Agreement, so I'm assuming that's the case.
But I think it was signed in Belfast. Was it not signed in Delhi? Either way, I think the Good Friday Agreement to noted commentators on the Irish situation, because genuinely, it's not a cop out. I genuinely that Ireland has had enough people who aren't from Ireland. I'll leave Ireland to the Irish. I think it's a much more respectful position. It's also a safer position for me politically. But I think that the situation in Ireland, I think that the Irish can speak for themselves. Most uni lectures in Scotland are English because the vacant jobs advertising. That's
true. That's true. Alf Baird, who's a member of our SSRG group, has been an academic, and they advertise the ads, in London when they have a post up in Scotland.
I know that they do recruit further afield from Scotland, but I don't think the majority of them.
But I think they prioritize people from abroad rather than Scottish scholars.
I don't know. I mean, I've been in academia a little bit, and I think they prioritize who they can get.
Alf Baird said it was like
roles is a real pain in the bum.
I mean, it was only like 20% Scots in academia, something like that. I don't have the exact statistics, but there's definitely an imbalance there. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I think with academia, you've also got to remember that a lot of academics move around a lot. So you'll find more Scots in academia outside of Scotland. Likewise, you'll find more, Welsh people in academia outside of Wales. They tend to move around a lot.
I work at a university, and 90% of the people are French, and in Scotland, a much percentage are.
I take the point, but that is something. I think things like that, though, if there is an imbalance, so that's the sort of thing that independence will help with.
Exactly,
because it'll stop. There is definitely an issue of brain drain, people moving away from Scotland for better paid jobs elsewhere. I think that's something
that's been the history. That's been a big history. My father included, my grandfather. They couldn't make it in Scotland, so so to speak. And so, and they were very intelligent people. And so they were able to, my dad became very anglicized. He went to Oxford. His accent was definitely not Glaswegian, later in life. And so he kind of had to disown a lot of his Scottishness, to make it, which he did quite well as a Unitarian minister. And the way his elocution was just excellent, very Oxfordian and stuff like that. But he couldn't have done it. He couldn't have been as successful as he was if he'd had a Govan accent, if he'd maintained his Govan accent, and it's part of the history.
It's cringe. It's part of the anti-Scottish kind of way the Westminster establishment has always treated parts of Scotland. But also they've done the same. It's not an anti-Scottish thing uniquely, because they've also done exactly the same in Ireland, in Wales, in Northern England. Any part of England that isn't really the southeast gets looked down upon. If you do a survey of 10 people from London and you play them a voice from Northern England, they will all use adjectives like stupid, uneducated, and things like this. And it's like, some of the most intelligent people in the world come from Northern England.
I know, and Scotland, Adam Smith, James Watt. I mean, all these, keys of the Enlightenment and industrialization. And anyway, I wanted to move on.
But yes, there are some good questions.
I wanted to talk about, basically what do you, supposedly the Scottish government is to come out with some kind of prospectus before independence, a referendum saying what the new Scotland will be like. And also there's the question of Europe. And we, in our group, the SSRG, contacted last year, over a year ago, EFTA, and asked them, hey, could Scotland join if the Holyrood elections last year were used as a plebiscite? And they basically said, yeah, as long as Scotland, the Scottish government, had the power to negotiate international treaties and the powers to abide by them, they'd be happy. They could join. They could have, as soon as they did that, which they didn't, obviously, but as soon as they proclaimed independence, or at least sovereignty in that way, they could have sent a letter to the EEA Council.
There's absolutely no problem there. Yeah.
The EFTA Council. Let me quickly, and then they would have very, very likely accepted, and then they would have, in the next monthly meeting of the EEA, the European Economic Agreement, they would have done everything they could to get Scotland back in the single market. So if they had done things that way, Scotland could have been in EFTA since last summer, basically, for almost over a year. But
I think that I mean, there's two issues there that need to be teased out there, and there's a third issue coming in the comments there. Someone talking about how we should have just the 2014 vote should only have been people born in Scotland. I disagree fundamentally, but someone saying, if we'd had them figures, we'd have been free in 2014. If you'd excluded all women, you'd have been free in 2014. If you'd excluded all older people, you'd have been free in 2014. But it would have still been wrong. So, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that, everyone in the country who lives and works and is above age vote, and we lost. The reason we vote is because of the vow. It's because of the threats against European Union citizens about pensions, a whole number of reasons. But dwelling on the past and trying to rig the franchise is the sort of thing the Tories would do, to be honest. We're above that. We're better than that. But to get back to thinking about EFTA, the two things there, plebiscite and the EFTA situation. I don't know why I've got a paintbrush in my hands. So having a vote as a plebiscite, that is an option. I think the First Minister said that is an option. We could pursue that. It's not the desirable option because an election is not the same as a referendum. And partly the reason for that is a little less murky if it's first past the post election. But in an election where you have a fairly complex voting system like the Scottish Parliament uses the additional member vote system.
Yeah, sure.
Saying we have won the election is a fairly easy thing to do. You've got the most number of MSPs, or you've got a majority of MSPs even, is not the same thing as having a plebiscite where you've got more than 50% of the electorate voting for you.
Right.
Add into that the complexity. So you could conceivably have a government and yet get 48% of the vote, because that's what happened. I think it's 48 or was it 47? You can also have a situation where some of the people don't realise that that's what it was. I know that that's fairly difficult. I think most people in Scotland would be daft to not know the SNP are in favour of independence. But if we had it in a manifesto saying, vote for us and we will declare independence, then some of the people may not be fully aware of that. Some of the people may not vote. I think it's murky. I'm not saying it's impossible. I just don't think it's as good as a referendum. It's a legal vote and can be used if you had it in your manifesto. Yes, but legal isn't the same as good. I think a referendum is better if you can get a referendum. I think if they deny us a referendum properly, like, we're going for a referendum next year. I think if they try and stop that and they're successful in the courts, I think then we'd be forced to go through a plebiscite. But it would still be better for everyone to have a referendum, because then the result is without doubt. It's not about the legalities, it's about the morality. Are the majority of the Scottish people in favour of independence? The only way to test that properly, I think, is a referendum. Everything outside of that is a second best alternative, which is why the government are in favour of a referendum. And I think we're going to win that. So, the what ifs can jump in the sea because we're going to win the referendum. I think we're on course to victory. The second part of what you're saying about EFTA, to get back to the thing, I know the comments are going mad now. The second part about EFTA is that EFTA membership is an option yet. Full EU membership is an option.
And even
I think full EU membership is my preference.
Just very quickly, there's no reason Scotland couldn't join EFTA quickly and then
go for full EU. Yeah, I think that would be a desirable course.
And still be part of the single market with EFTA. So that's an option as well.
Yeah, I think that the European Union full membership, I think, is in our best interests. But at the same time, I think that's a discussion for another matter, a discussion for another day. I think EFTA membership would be a good first step in that regard. Sure. I'm certainly not against that, but I think the side issues of that, EFTA membership, then EEA, do you go for full EU membership? Do you negotiate an EFTA membership? What would be the conditions of entry? There's a lot of questions around that. I think independence first, and then we can settle the situation about European Union after that. But for me, we just had a border discussion about this at that AIM movement with English Scots, where we were discussing that.
What were some of the?
Well, this was like a fairly broad part of the conversation of what happens with the English border if Scotland becomes independent, which I think we're going to, and then Scotland rejoins the European Union. I said there's basically three options here of a soft border where neither country is in the European Union, neither country is in EFTA, or they're both in EFTA, because the rest of the UK could decide to join EFTA. That's still option.
They may not.
I know, but
they may not want.
Yeah, that's another massive. But that's like a soft border, and then you could have a firmish border where Scotland's maybe in EFTA or England isn't, or England moves further away from the European Union alignment, and we move closer to EFTA or actually in EFTA. And then you could have a full-on what we called a hard border, even though it doesn't have to be a hard border, where we are a European Union member and the rest of the UK is not. And I say the rest of the UK, I really mean England, because I think our independence, I think Wales' independence is going to go massively up as well.
I
Wales will leave too. And I think Northern Ireland, and not that I'm going to comment on that, but I would, if I was a betting man, and I'm not, but if I was a betting man, I would imagine that world maps in about 10 to 15 years' time will see a certain line removed from the map of Ireland.
I agree.
Because I don't think that's so. When I say England, I mean England, because England will be an independent country on and of its own. Because I think Wales will go
and being able to be itself.
It'd be good for England.
I've had many lovely English friends over the years, and I've always felt that that they've kind of been overshadowed by this notion of being British and not really being able to be themselves. And I associate many really lovely qualities with with English people I've known. They take you to the train station, they wait on the platform and wave you goodbyes, you go away.
Yeah,
just these lovely memories that you have of English people, then that kind of very deferential, calm, quiet, intelligent quality that I associate with so many English people, including yourself, and and them being able to
fooled you then. Yeah, I think England will benefit from Scottish independence, because they'll see that better things are possible. They'll see that a better way is possible. For so many decades, the London establishment has done what it's in an own best interest of London, and the rest of England has gone hung. And I think that seeing Scotland doing a better thing, and then maybe Wales too, I think that will reawaken parts of England that will be like, well, hold on a minute, they were doing less well off than us a few years back, yet they've got a spaceport now, and we've still got food banks. I want to vote for someone else. So I think that will help England. There is someone commenting about there in the comments there going off about still shouldn't have the settlers aren't. I think that's really unhelpful language. For startly, I'm a settler, and I'm very much in favour of independence. I'm the founder of English Scots for Yes. I'm an SNP Councillor. If you can find someone more in favour of independence, please feel free. I'd love to meet them. Secondly, the other comments there, and then there about hard border, and this is where I thought the border situation that we discussed in the border discussion we had with English Scots at AIM last week. Hard borders are not a scary thing. Most borders are hard borders. I believe you've lived in America for a long time, Mark.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
The American-Canadian border, is it a really hard border?
I haven't gone through that one, but anyway. But yeah.
People traverse it every day to go and buy maple syrup.
Yes, I have. Excuse me. Yes, I went on my honeymoon there. We went to Nova Scotia, and we got on a ferry, went through Passport.
There's a hard border. Ed Miliband back in 2014 would have us believe that there were going to be machine gun nests and towers and lights. The Cold War is over. There's no checkpoint, Charlie. There's no checkpoint, Dave, either. A hard border is not the same. Most borders are fluid, because that's the point of a border. If it's not fluid, if you can't pass through it, it's not a border, it's a wall. There's only one border that I can think of like that in the entire world.
There's the common travel agreement. So
Scotland's part of the common travel agreement. I don't see us leaving that either.
And if Scotland became part of EFTA quickly after somehow achieving independence, the UK has already signed agreement with EFTA countries, and so Scotland would benefit from that as well.
Yeah, that's the irony of
the border, but it makes it easier, I think.
The irony of the situation with the EU and EFTA is that if we leave the UK, which we're going to do, I think, in a year's time. Well, I think we'll vote to it. I think it will take 5-6 years to negotiate exit and make the arrangements. That's how it goes. Yeah. I think that when we join EFTA in the EU, we'll be part of this massive trading bloc that has pretty preferential trading agreements with the rest of the world, and England doesn't.
Yeah.
So I think we'll actually be in a kind of more favourable position there, where we're going to be benefiting from a lot of those agreements, and some of them were made with Ireland in mind. So we're okay with a land border with the EU, and there won't have to be checks. Suddenly, Scotland's got a land border with England, so suddenly there'll be a land border with the EU in England as well as Northern Ireland, and I think it'll be really hard for them to then start pushing back against it when it was fine for Northern Ireland. I think this is a very awkward situation for London, which is one of the reasons why I think that whilst Boris Johnson is a balloon, and we all know that, I think he'll probably be out soon anyway. But regardless of who the actual person in charge in 10 Downing Street is, I think you'll find that the Mandarins who are really in charge will be saying, "Look, we're lost. Look at the polling. It's 50-50 and you've not even declared the referendum yet." As soon as the campaign starts and we get the white paper out again that will, show the actual stated position of the government, which again, I'd like to point out is not the actual position of Scotland. It could well be that, this is the first Scottish government, it's a different party or whatever. So it doesn't have to be that, but it's what the government would recommend as the operating manual sort of thing. Yeah. When we start seeing that, I think we're going to see us up at 55-60%. Okay.
I want to offer a slightly contrary view, just in the sense that the UK government, not the English, not the Scottish, but the UK government was the most successful imperial nation for a reason, because they were lying, duplicitous, colonial, brutal imperialists for their whole years, and for like 300 years. And Scotland, which is one of their last, what I would call a colony, their views may differ on what constitutes an actual colony, but there's no question that Scotland has very little power. The Scottish government has relatively little power over its really big issues. They don't have, the land, the mineral rights. All of the money from oil goes to London. All of the whiskey revenue goes to the exchequer. And so
most of the rescue revenue goes to the distilleries. To be fair, the duty is still quite a small amount compared to the make they make. But yeah, I take the point.
But all I'm saying
they're all French, incidentally.
I don't see. Oh, Scots are so. We have to respond to the Scottish democratic will. No. You
confused what I was saying there, Mark.
I don't quite see that. I'm being.
I maybe didn't state it. I don't think they'll be acting to respond to our democratic will and recognize and be respectful of that. No, I think they'll start bargaining for what they can get out of it. Okay. I think at a certain point they'll realize the game's up. We need to start negotiating, because otherwise we're going to lose more than we bargained for. I think that they will start negotiating simply because they will realize they can spend all their time fighting Indy, or they can acknowledge it's probably going to happen, and then
Yeah.
I, I don't know, but I mean, it's.
I don't know. I don't know either. You know, I don't profess to
I
know.
think that's where the negotiation when you start seeing Faslane's a huge issue. I mean, it's 3 miles away from me out my window. I can actually look out and see it. I think that's a huge issue when you start seeing the MOD taking the notion of independence very seriously and starting to come up with contingency plans. I think that's when they won't announce that they're doing this. Incidentally, this will be the internal position of Whitehall. But when you start seeing that happening, I think that's when you'll realize, hold on a minute here. They know the game's up and they're already planning for what comes next. They're planning for negotiations. They're planning for how they can get what they need. And I think that's where we're coming to fairly soon. I think that's why whoever Boris is replaced by, it doesn't actually matter. I think that going forward, the UK government is going to stop playing silly games with the referendum because they know sooner or later the game's up. Even if they manage to fight it in the courts, even if they win, what will happen next? We'll have a plebiscite, and that will pass, and then we'll just declare Indy, and then they don't get anything. They don't want that. That's where they lose everything at that point. So at a certain point, the cooler heads will say, look, don't fight this. Let them have a vote. We maybe won't lose that, and then they'll lose the vote, and then they'll start bargaining for what they need. They'll need a lease on Faslane. They'll need agreement of oil. And
I'm a little less sanguine on you of the good, the quote unquote goodwill of the British state, but we'll leave it.
Oh no, there's no goodwill at all. It's enlightened self-interest. They will start bargaining for what they need.
Yeah,
they will be terrified about losing access to the oil, terrified of losing access to the energy systems, terrified about losing somewhere to keep their submarines whilst they build a new base somewhere else. That will be where they start negotiating and bargaining hard because they need those things.
Yeah.
And to be frank, whilst the Tories don't want Scotland to go, they don't need Scotland. They want Scotland, but they need the things that are in Scotland more. So if they realise that they're up, then they will start bargaining for that more.
What do you think about Northern Ireland? I think it seems to me as if many of the Tories perceive Northern Ireland is more of a nuisance right now. I mean, it doesn't really, from a purely self-interest, it doesn't have the oil, it doesn't have the whiskey revenue. It's troublesome. There's been all the, this conflict over the years, and but you still have this hardcore of British, people in Northern Ireland who consider themselves British. How do you see that? I mean, I know you didn't want to.
I see that the people of Ireland have had 500 years of English people telling them how to think and act in their politics, and I'm not going to join them. But no, I think there are issues.
I won't push you any further on it.
No, it's fine. I think it's a point of respect. But the situation I think with Ireland, in many ways, the situation with the European Union is a microcosm for how Scotland can then look at, there's a land border between the UK and the European Union. I think that's where Northern Ireland and Ireland can, benefit Scotland from the independence perspective of looking at them and saying, well, look, you managed to work out a land border there, we can do it here. I think that there's something else we teased out of the border conversation. I know the time's probably up, but something else we teased out of the border conversation was that post-independence, in fact, before independence, and I'll be taking this forward with some colleagues soon, I hope, we actually need to start talking to the parts of the border in England that are close to the border, Northumberland, Cumbria, and working with them, because post-Indy, we need to revitalize our border and the Priest Galloway areas that have been neglected due to London misrule over the years. The infrastructure down here is terrible, all sorts of problems. But also we need to start helping them parts of England work with Scotland. So I think we need to start working with them parts of England because London doesn't care about them. And I think we will stand to benefit tremendously from trade and, European Union stuff down on the border there. If we can say, look, we need fast rail access into England, we'll help you pay for this at the border because we're building a great big superport to be, England's route into Europe or Europe's route into England. And we'll help you work that. We'll help you do that. I think that there's tremendous benefits to that. I think they could see the north of England suddenly being very, very, very useful in the same way that Dover is a massive port simply because it gets you access to the continent. We could end up seeing Carlisle and, Berwick being big ports because they get you access to the European Union. You don't down to Dover and get on a ferry, you can just put it over the border in Scotland and it's in the European Union. And that's, I think, something quite interesting in terms of the future possibilities. I think independence will be very advantageous to them parts of England too.
Okay.
And we've probably gone over time there. Sorry.
It's been a delightful conversation, and please hang on a little bit after we
absolutely. Sorry for the connection problems, everybody that have them.
Anything you'd like to add to our viewers before we say goodnight?
Yeah, I think I've seen some of the comments here, and if you're reading them post this, because I know some people watch this afterwards, there's a couple of who've said some pretty unpleasant things about ethnicity and nationalism and stuff that I really don't think represent the independence movement. And what I am heartened by is pretty much everybody else in the comments has turned them around and said, no, shut up. And I think that's really useful, because the independence movement has to not just be seen to be whiter than white, which it is. Mm-hmm. I think the independence movement has a really good place to police itself and make sure that, you know, the lunatic voices of the fringes, which exist in every movement, don't get a foothold. And I think that's something the independence movement historically been really great at. And I think it's good to see that that's still the case. And
we have some lovely comments here at the end.
And thanks everyone for tuning in and watching.
Yeah, you're on our side. Thanks. It's always very gratifying. So okay.
Well, thanks for that, everyone, and thanks for watching and sticking with us to the connection.
Thank you, Matt. Always a delight to talk to you, of course. And
happy to come back anytime.
Okay. All right. With pleasure. And good night, everybody. And I hope to have Matt back soon. And it was a delightful conversation. So thank you very much.